All right. Hi, everybody. My name is Sanjeet Dang. I'm the co-founder and chairman of You First Capital. We have been running the firm for almost 3-4 years now. And prior to that, we were at Intel Capital, been in Silicon Valley for almost 20 years. We do investments in enterprise software startups, plus whatever Elon Musk does. So that's been our investment thesis. And I'd like to request Ekta to introduce herself.
Hi, everybody. I'm the CEO of You First Capital. Like Sanjeet said, we've been driving this firm for 4 years, and we were at both at Intel before and driving investments across different enterprise tech sectors.
Wonderful. So with that, why don't we invite and welcome our keynote speaker for today, David Tsao. David is the Chief Information and Security Officer at Instacart. And he actually recently joined Instacart, literally a couple of weeks ago. Before that, he was the Chief Information and Security Officer at Marqeta, which went public, I think, last year. And David has a phenomenal background and solid experience in the overall enterprise software space, I would say. So that's why we thought it would be good for our startups and our friends, investor friends, to hear from David and have maybe an informal conversation around what he's seeing in the market. So let's all welcome David.
Thank you, Sanjit. It's really great to be here and great to meet everybody. We have, there's a benefit here of having a relatively small group. So I would actually like to suggest this be as interactive as possible, because I want to make sure that whatever we talk about or whatever we're discussing today is really relevant and of interest to everyone in this group. So there's quite a few different topics that I can potentially expand upon. So I will start with one first, and then I would like to open it up to gauge some further interest to see, do you want to keep exploring this, or we can also broaden the conversation. And my hope is that the series I will be able to meet the expectation of the broader series, because I see you've had a chance to have some other fantastic folks that I respect, like Avon and others at Sequoia. So at a high level, I'm going to briefly describe to you my career journey, and the reason for that is when it comes to how we work in kind of solving security and partnering with different security startups, the background will help inform why I have specific biases or preferences. So I don't come from, I would say, like the traditional, security only focus. My background actually has been more around kind of IT, business enablement. And when I was at Gilead, a biopharmaceutical company in the Bay Area, I worked within Shadow IT for a number of years. And when we had our first security hire open up, the reason I took the position was because I was afraid that the company would hire a security person that would make all of our lives miserable. And so I essentially was from the business and was fearing that. So that was the reason why I took that role on. As part of that process, though, obviously made a lot of mistakes along the way, trying to figure out, what does correct and appropriate security look like? And it's led me in this very lengthy, winding journey, if you will, to a variety of tech companies, including Viva and others, to where I am at Instacart today. And there's two dynamics that came up in this process. So one is that trying to figure out who were the kind of trusted advisors or the relevant security practitioners that I could rely on. In my first iteration of this at Gilead, I worked very closely with the Big Fours and the Gartners of the world to try and get a sense and pulse of what was out there from a security market. Later on, then, quickly tried to figure out who are the other fellow practitioners in the Bay Area that I could meet with. And so I spent a lot of time going to dinners and so forth. And that's where I really got to meet a lot of other key practitioners. And then the second aspect became, well, what are the solutions and how should we begin to solve these particular problems? I think it was Dave DeWalt that had mentioned at one of his speakers speeches that, within the security vendor space, product marketing is measured in miles, but product features are measured in inches. And so, it was really easy to get wowed by the big banners at RSA for like the large vendors, let's say, versus the smaller startups. But I began to notice a trend where if we would begin to work with other peers and they were partnering with small security startups, we meet with them. Those security startups would introduce me to their VCs. Those VCs would introduce me to other security startups. And I began to get further exposure into the security startup ecosystem. And that's when I began to really appreciate a lot of the innovation and more advanced, sophisticated capabilities that were being built, maybe still immature in different ways, but still typically ahead of some of the more established players that were more or less trying to resell a very similar product or just trying to scale versus trying to add additional features. And so that led me essentially to some more recent conversations where we began to partner. When I say we, my team and I began to partner very closely more with smaller security startups, and oftentimes as design partners, where we would provide feedback into the product and always try to ensure that it is fairly generalized without making it too kind of bespoke to what our pain points were. And we found a fair amount of traction and success through that journey. So, we were one of Lacework's first customers, one of Redlock's first customers, Demisto's first customers. And so, going through that process and then seeing them get acquired, began to ask the question of, wait a second, we would spend as a team collectively, significant amounts of time partnering with these security startups and then, help them to advance their product and get additional market adoption. And then they would acquired and then the company would benefit significantly, or the startup would benefit significantly. But we essentially were like, okay, maybe we had, 25% savings or something like that on our annual bill. Is that really, is that a fair exchange, if you will? And so I had some ideas of, are there opportunities for us to potentially kind of participate in more closely in a startup's growth? And so that is where kind of co-founded the Silicon Valley CISO investment community, which is known as SVCI, where today it's a group of 50 or 60 or so CISOs that essentially, look at different startups and we make investment decisions in. Now, there's obviously trickiness around disclosure and conflict, et cetera, that we can get into, but we have found that to be a great way to open up our eyes. When I say eyes, open up the practitioner eyes into what a security startup and a security vendor faces throughout their journey, a lot more than just always focusing on the product. Like, it's really easy to talk about, oh, I want, with this particular feature, I want, improved single sign-on, or I want you to be able to do deeper threat analysis or something along those lines. But oftentimes, once we have a better appreciation of what the founder is facing, then we can have better conversations. It's more of a partnership, right, than just kind of the distance of the vendor. So leading us to kind of where we stand today, it's been interesting to see, I think Momentum Cyber is tracking, what is it now, 5,000 plus or something crazy like that, security startups in the entire ecosystem, and how many kind of repeat plays within a given space that all these different VCs are still trying to solve problems in. And it is very difficult for a lot of the peers that I talk to figure out what is the right fit, because the greatest risk that we typically face is either you go with a well-established proven player, kind of the Palo Altos of the world and their ecosystem, and you go with the platform play, or if you go with the smaller startups, the likelihood of them having an acquisition or some sort of, unless you're the first dominant player, not necessarily making it and folding or going into like a zombie mode where they just are not really being able to make proper investments is meaningful. It's significant. The risk is pretty high. And so it's that great challenge of trying to find that healthy balance of partnering with the innovative players that there's greater risk while still ensuring that the overall benefit is still realized. I'm happy to talk a little bit more details of how, as a security program, we look into building more effective security advisory boards, how we do more security investing, how to measure and look at the different solutions that we're seeing and different trends. And I think one of Sanjit's asks was, can we talk about kind of market trends at a high level? So before I jump into that, I just wanted to pause and see if there are any particular questions or themes that anyone would like to further explore before I start talking about more details around market trends.
David, I have a question. My name is Ram Satya. I'm the co-founder and CTO of Connecto. We are a API-first platform. My question is centered around the concept of design partnership that you mentioned, right? You will see when we present, right? When I present how we adopt the whole design partnership. We have partnered with a lot of that early stage, prospects for a company like us, right? The question specifically I wanted to hear from you, right, around, how much is this whole concept of design partnership is still accepted, still respected, right, in the industry from a startup standpoint, right? Because when I've been on the buy side as well in my past, and I always look at in a startup as a big risk. I wanted to hear your perspective. And then the second question, because you mentioned about what is in it for us on the way how your involvement with identifying right point of view for some of those startups, right, in the security space. Although we are not explicitly in the security space, also I wanted to understand how is your current initiative answering that question, right? What is in it for you and your team that is helping these startups, get to a stage by identifying the right pain points of the customers and whatnot, right? How are you thinking about that? What is in it story?
Sure. Thank you for that question, Ram. Really appreciate it. So on the question around design partnerships, I'm still seeing a lot of interest from a number of peers, but I think generally there's going to be kind of the security, sorry, my son's here. There's going to be security leaders that already have that more innovative risk-taking approach in the first place, and they're willing to partner. The constraint's really going just to be around the team and whether or not they have the capacity to manage that. So what we've done myself in previous lives has been, I'll have a lead engineer that's the one that has the hands-on experience that'll be the person really mostly working with the particular startup and providing that feedback. I mean, from my lens as a CISO, unfortunately, I am fairly distant, and so I can help provide the introductions and essentially get feedback from peers. But beyond maybe recommending 2 or 3 options to the team, I'm not going to have as much benefit or insight that I can offer to the rest of the team. So what I have seen is, there's definitely a group of peers that have that, and they continually at the CISO level meet with different security startups that are in the space, and then they have their team essentially have a pipeline to work on taking in those different startups. Regarding the second question that you asked around what's in it for us, essentially, I think most startups typically go down the path of an advisor agreement, and they'll say, hey, you can sign up and you'll get equity over a period of time. But the challenge, at least I have found, is if I do that, unless I put money into the agreement, after 1 year, it's really difficult to try to keep that particular startup top of mind. So you want to meet once a month. Okay, that's fine. After a year, it's like, wait a second, who is this company? I've moved on to solving different problems. Does it really make sense anymore? So that's the risk of the advisory agreement. And then plus you go, from a founder's perspective, your runway is probably 5 years if you have a successful go at it. So how do you ensure that that advisor is a strong partner throughout that entire process, beyond just trying to solve for and get a POC? So what I found is, if we can put in small amounts of money, and I'm talking anywhere from 10 to 25K, something like that per investment, the level of interest and engagement just shoots up like crazy. And especially if you couple together with an advisory agreement, depending on how much kind of a partnership you're looking for, that can actually work out really, really well. And it's most of the peers that I have, we're not high net worth individuals per se, so we don't have massive budgets. So that's very meaningful amounts of money to a founder. When you're doing a raise, it's not going to change your valuation. If anything, it'll make your cap table a little messier, but generally it's not going to have a meaningful impact in terms of where you're getting money. So I found certainly looking at SVCI and the level of engagement we have seen within that, as well as a lot of the direct kind of angel investments that I've been a part of, that has really demonstrated a lot more closer partnerships than any other type of agreement that I've seen. Any other questions before we talk a little bit more around kind of trends, if you will?
When you talk about trends, David, if you can also, given your experience at Marqeta, if you can talk also about the financial services sector in general, and what trends you are seeing within that sector, that would be appreciated. There are some startups in the audience that cater to that sector. I mean, they provide enterprise software solutions, but they're catering to that sector. I think it will be helpful for them.
Okay, sure. So at a super high level, think about what are the kind of the rationale for fintechs or financial services disruption. And I think there was a McKinsey study done several years ago that talked about kind of quote unquote digital penetration. So I'm just describing the TAM at first before we talk about the specific trends, right? Of why fintech in particular is particularly interesting. And if you look at like retail advertising, essentially Amazon and Google's of the world, like they have significant market penetration, obviously. But if you look at the financial services space, a lot of the large dominant players are still essentially running either on mainframe, or they're still going through a lot of kind of digital transformation. And so what the opportunities here are, what the opportunities are from a fintech perspective is to really try and disrupt that market. The challenges that they face are essentially going to be, regulatory requirements are quite strict because when you're dealing with money movement, obviously, U.S. government and other governments really care about, where that money is going. The second challenge is going to be fraud, essentially, because if you look at where the risks that are faced from a loss perspective, there is, organized crime syndicates that are essentially, incurring fraud, because if you can steal that money, then that's immediate benefit to be had. And I don't remember the exact stat, but what I've heard is if you look at the traditional financial services players, their percentage of fraud is, I believe, in the single digits or low single digits. But if you look at the fintechs of the world, their fraud percentages are in the low teens. So it is significantly higher. And historically, the premise of why that was okay was, well, it's in the spirit of disruption. You have to break things in order to find that path through innovation. And what we've seen more recently, especially in this past year, is, well, if you have in this economic climate, like there's not such a tolerance for pure growth. You now have to demonstrate value. You have to demonstrate profitability, of course. And if you look at Klarna as a great example of this, they went from a valuation, I forget the exact number, but it was in mid double digits down to, I think, less than 7 billion. So it was a significant down round that they had to go through. And so the challenges from a security lens are, as a fintech, as a financial services, if you're in the smaller player space, then if you have a breach or anything like that, if you experience a breach or anything like that, like it's essentially a company ending event because you cannot incur. I'm sorry, 1 second. I'm going to close the door. I'll be right back.
No worries, totally understand.
Okay, thanks. Sorry about that. He managed to get in the door, and I didn't know what happened. So if you have a breach as a financial services company, it's really a company-ending event, right? So if we look at what are the ways that those companies get in, when I say the ways that the companies, what are the ways that threat actors get into those companies? It's essentially trying to analyze where the risks are, and to figure out where to make those bets. From what I've seen from other peer companies, and it is essentially a combination of a lot of investments in the fraud space, account takeover, money movement, illegal money movement, et cetera, as well as looking at essentially the same tactics and techniques that threat actors are using for kind of ransomware and extortion plays. And so we've seen that happen a lot. What's interesting is from the market opportunity that's related in the cyber insurance space. And I realize cyber insurance is adjacent to kind of financial services, but it's effectively the market for risk transference. And so the insights I try to get are going to be from a combination of peers from other financial services firms or fintech companies like Chime and Robinhood and others. The good thing, I think, is generally investment is still fairly high in that space because those fintech companies generally recognize the risk is the greatest. And it's in the trends that we're seeing essentially are still very similar to what we saw previously in terms of percentage of investment relative to the overall investments and budgets that companies have. At my last company, and as an example, security is still, was number one priority and essentially is, in the top two, I believe, moving forward in terms of company objectives. And so how, ensuring trust and maintaining security for our customers is still very much top of mind.
That's very, very helpful, David. Thank you for that. I am itching to ask a question regarding the chat GPT, but I want to hold off on that question, and I'll let the audience ask a little more focused and pertinent questions first. So this is a good chance for the startups, and we also have a couple of VCs in the audience. If anybody wants to ask questions. And I also want to give a shout out to Takano-san. Takano-san is the CEO of TIS Ventures based in Bay Area. Hello, Takano-san.
Oh, sorry, I'm muted. Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for inviting me today.
Thank you. And then we have Steve, who runs DNS Capital, is here. He is dialing in from London. He's based in Bay Area, but he's currently in London. Thanks, Steve, for dialing in. Go ahead. Sorry,
Sanjay, I have a question for David on the security aspects, right? Especially on the trends. David, you mentioned a couple of interesting things around the adjacent space on the cyber insurance and how the risk transfer, right? And we have seen the evolution of security players, right, for the quote unquote, digital players, whether it is a fintech or if it is, neobanks and all of that, right? On the cyber security and cyber insurance companies, which is adjacent space, do you see how, like, for example, in healthcare, there is a whole evolution of preventive healthcare that is evolving, right? From a payer perspective, right? Now payers are starting to see startups that are, promoting preventive health because obviously they want to reduce their cost because they are very similar to the, the adjacent space that we're talking about, which is the cyber insurance, right? So in the cyber insurance, do you see, are there any security opportunities from a preventive standpoint that are evolving, not just from a digital players or the insurance players or the security players that are supporting the digital companies, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I mean, the short answer is yes, and let me expand on that. So the market in the cyber insurance space is still fairly immature, meaning if you look at the large players, the large carriers, the Aons, the AXLs of the world, the Chubbs, and generally speaking, they have been underwater. And there was a stat I heard, and I can't quote the exact reference, but essentially it's something like for every $1 premium they've been taking in, they're paying out, over $1. It's something like $1.20 or something like that. So if you look at the very large players, and in a number of cases, they are reducing the number of policyholders, significantly increasing those premiums. And anybody that's on the founder side that's been trying to get cyber insurance, you may have seen, double, if not triple premium increases right in the past year or so. And the reason for that is those larger traditional players don't know how to properly gauge risk. They misgauged the potential risk of a breach, and so did not charge the right policy amount. So to your point, there is an opportunity for preventive health, meaning, well, if a cyber insurance company is willing to adequately measure and help a policyholder implement the right security controls, then they should reduce the risk of a breach or risk of a security incident. Absolutely, that is true theoretically. The challenge is from a maturity perspective, there's a constraint on funding because that policy has to be backed by some reinsurance firm or something like that. So if you get a $25 million policy, someone at some point is going to have $25 million in the bank ready for you to pay out in case you experience that breach. So that actually is, I think, the greatest constraint, because it's not as if you can have a new disruptor come in and say, hey, if I tell you exactly what to do and I reduce your risk, then I'll write you a policy, because they can't get the money. Like you're not going to go convince even a large PE firm to essentially fund a significant amount of that insurance. So we are seeing a number of players that are out there. I believe, Coalition, Cabell that I'm working with, and others are getting significant traction. And if you look at their year-over-year, quarter-over-quarter growth, it's massive because they're essentially offering that premise of, hey, we can help tell you what to do. And because of the funding challenge in terms of the insurance side, it's harder for them to write very large policies. So they're essentially starting in the SMB market space. And right now it's essentially, hey, if you don't meet that bar, we can reject you. I think talking to a number of these cyber insurance startups, the percentage that they reject policy applications is somewhere around 30 to 50%, something like that. So they reject a decent number, which means, and those companies, unfortunately, simply are probably going to be without coverage. And so if you're hit by ransomware or something along those lines, like that could also be a company-ending event. So the challenge is just how do we get through that hump or can we overcome that hump of the funding constraint while trying to be more supportive and more preventive, to your point of what these policyholders need to do. I believe we can get there. It's just a combination of customer education and the enterprise market. It's a very different market compared to SMB. And for good or bad, security practitioners like myself, we tend to be highly opinionated. And so it's, even though, I'm sure everyone has good intent of wanting to help, share, well, this is the things we're seeing in the world. There's going to be a lot of skepticism and a lot of concern of, wait a second, is this really going to be helpful? Or can I just, take my money and then let me transfer that risk away?
I hate to stay that, but I have one more follow-up question, Sanjit and David.
Sure. Yeah.
So, David, I have a point of view around, the security risk assessment, but I want to hear your feedback, right? And if you're familiar with the way how cash and stock holding companies, right? Banks, credit card companies, travel, and all of those companies, they have equivalent of a Basel or a treasury reporting and credit reporting, right? And when somebody is trying to evaluate, is Amex the right investment, is Bank of America right investment, they always look at not just the cap table, but also they look at the credit ratings. And credit rating is essentially conveying the message around your current asset, your cash flow, and all your treasury reporting and all of that, right? So it provides a scoring. But do you see there's an opportunity for cyber insurance companies to start thinking about creating a security rating for all of the policy holders, right? Whether it is, fintech or if it is digital, SaaS companies and such, right? I want to hear your feedback. If they are already existing, right? That will be amazing to start adopting as well.
Yeah. I think there's just definitely a lot of opportunity there. And I know there are some companies that have their own ratings that they're doing internally, essentially ranking all the different companies. I don't know that there is, I don't know what the time frame or what the broader market has a tolerance for, just because that seems to either imply kind of industry coalitions and or regulation that may try to push for those things, and probably the latter, I suspect, if we really wanted to get traction. I know, at a high level, you've probably seen this as well. SEC has been pushing for essentially qualified experts on the board in security, not just around, whether that's around audit or financial services. So there's definitely that movement towards that space. We look at CISA and coming out with the draft guidance around, at least breach reporting and at least trying to coordinate across industry from that lens as well. So certainly there's been a lot of effort to try to get there. It's just, I think everyone's taking kind of more careful steps because they don't want to kind of overreach, right? I think the greatest challenge with having an accurate score, if you will, if you think about credit score equivalence, well, because of the way our financial services work, there's a lot more transparency for that these agencies can see in terms of what's happening. And when you think about trying to measure security risk for a given company, the challenge is how much insight can you actually get? And we've seen this with kind of the BitSights and others, security scorecards of the world that try to analyze outside in And there's been a lot of kind of criticism, I think, by security practitioners that that's a very biased or one-sided picture, that really the bulk of our valuable data is inside and we're not going to expose that to the public internet, right? So you're not going to get an easy way to see that. You have to have an opt-in. You have to have each business being willing to say, I am going to share and open up and give you that insight, that kind of inside out approach. And so that's one of the classic challenges that not only cyber insurance companies have, but customer. So if we're dealing with a vendor from the customer lens, we have that same challenge as well. Like, hey, this is third-party risk. How am I supposed to know that my data as a customer is secure in that vendor? It's the exact same challenge. And, I see a fairly wide gamut from the practitioner lens, which is in some cases, we can build up really good partnerships with, I'll now use the vendor customer relationship versus cyber insurance, but like we are able to build really good partnerships with certain vendors, but in some cases, the vendors may be very compliance driven and just want to do, compliance checkbox. And if that's the case, as a practitioner, my bias is immediately, you're just going to make my life harder because you're going to be asking me things that just have no relevance at all. I recall in a past life, we were getting audited by a customer and they said, oh, do you have asbestos fire blankets in your data center? And we're like, what? Like, we manage everything in the cloud. Like, what are you talking about? And like, no, you have to answer this. You have to show us, do you have an asbestos blanket? And we're like, so, that's the danger, of course, of kind of being overly compliance focused, is you really miss what their true risks are. And so the partnership, I find, is a much stronger way to get there. And it's not scalable from what I've been able to achieve. It's mostly based off of, tell me, what are the security incidents that you have had recently? And you have to be very transparent about that. Tell me what your headcount is relative to your total headcount or total development teams. And those are like the two major metrics that we try to gauge. And there's maybe 4 or 5 others that give quick signal in terms of, is this a company that truly values security or not? Or are they just trying to check the box? But most companies don't want to talk about that. Most companies don't want to say, well, I've experienced this number of breaches and security incidents, and this is what they were, right? It's like they're very hesitant to even disclose it to their own customers. So that's kind of the balance to be had of how do we get that trust and visibility so that we can get that kind of objective view of risk while not kind of being overcome by fear of potential liability or brand damage, etc.
Excellent, David. Very good point of view, especially around that pre-existing conditions. If I have to map that to the preventive health, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
I had a question around shifting the focus a little on the insider threat or the use of collaboration tools like coming in big time into the enterprises. What kind of challenges are you seeing as a CISO that needs to be addressed from a risk point of view? Certainly, compliance seems to be a checkboxing type of an exercise in most of the companies. What keeps you up in the night? With the hybrid cloud and everything else, right?
So, I think it's a fair statement to say that insider risk is one of the hardest problems to solve, right? And you think about, Snowden is probably the most public example of this, but any of those types of breaches that have occurred, shadow brokers probably is another. So you have trusted people, you have insiders. You can't really use technical controls to prevent them, otherwise they won't get their work done, right? So at the end game, it's very, very difficult to have 100% adherence to that. However, it is certainly a risk that needs to be mitigated to whatever extent you can. And there's just a variety of attack surfaces and threats that exist today, just because there's so many different collaboration tools, to your point. In past lives, we partnered with security solutions in the space that are trying to solve this problem, but the classic challenge they have is breadth versus depth. And so if you have the ability to monitor breadth-wise, then you're not going to go very deep if you start thinking about the Salesforces, the Google Workspaces, the Workdays, and the ServiceNows of the world, where those are really obviously very complex environments and platforms on their own with their own kind of third-party applications that run on top of them as well. And so, versus let's say like a Notion or a Lucidchart or something that's a little bit more cut and dry.
Yeah.
So just even getting visibility from an IT lens is its own challenge, let alone trying to figure out, okay, to what extent may data leak, whether intentionally or inadvertently. So it's definitely one of the harder problems to solve. I mean, not the only, but the most common way I've seen my peers and myself approach this is, not a huge surprise, risk-based approach. So say, okay, well, we will try to protect the biggest systems and, your Office 365s, the Google Workspaces, the Salesforces, and then maybe your cloud environments, and the rest of them. It's like, okay, if you're using your data flow diagram tools like the Lucidcharts of the world or the Miros of the world, like we're not going to really spend a whole lot of energy there. But yeah, it is definitely an interesting development, or it's an interesting maturity in the security industry. If you think about how the traditional tools were more kind of network, end user device focused, and now everything has to obviously shift into kind of SaaS native.
Totally. Thank you.
Sure.
Awesome. So thank you, David. I will ask you the question about the ChatGPT. Have you had a chance to try it out, and what do you think about it? And after this, we'll get into the startup presentations.
Yeah, it's been fascinating how viral that has gone, right? In terms of seeing that blow up on Hacker News, and even internally in my own company, seeing like how amazing it looks at the surface. And you ask the questions of, hey, I have an issue with my particular code, and it'll even walk you through, here are potential reasons that there was an issue in your code. Now, it's a super early days, right? Obviously, this is brand new, and I think the general sense at the moment as well, if you start to really think through, if you look at the detailed answers, how accurate is it really? And I think generally there's a lot of debate that surface level it looks fine, but the accuracy may not be that great. And I think you've seen this in the news. Stack Overflow even blocked ChatGPT answers because they really weren't that accurate. But it reminds me of an anecdote where I had a former skip level VP that I used to talk to a lot as kind of a mentor, and this person was a technical expert in their field and was very, very experienced. And I remember, but they 25 plus years of experience, let's say, right? But I remember talking to them and asking them their opinion on different security topics, and oftentimes I would relate to my boss, hey, this person wouldn't always have the right rationale. Like I would dispute the rationale for it, because a lot of times it would be based on out of date information, because it's things that they had seen in their career, 10, 15 years ago, let's say, and it's a very different space today. But what was interesting is at the end of the day, more often than not, they were right. Like the answer was actually correct. And so I think that's an interesting analogy, because what I've seen in ChatGPT is a lot of times the answer itself may be correct, and people are debating to say, well, wait a second, but the explanation and the details of that are inaccurate. So can it really be trusted? And to some extent, the question is then, is this actually exposing the way that humans think as well? Like it is an artifact of if you think about how it actually has analyzed all the data that humans have written over time, it essentially is a reflection of ourselves, where we have our own biases and our own anecdotes. The story I'm telling you was a story of this person that I worked with over 15 years ago. Today, it's very different, but that's like one of the core memories I have. And so it's just an interesting thing to look at. Like, yes, humans are not perfect, right? We have many flaws. I think ChatGPT, in essence, almost has inherited that to some extent. So it's incredible. It's amazing. It's super scary in some sense, but it just is making me be a little bit more self-reflective at the moment.
That's a very, I would say, human answer for an AI chatbot, and it's probably correct way of thinking as well. And as I think it learns, it'll probably evolve. But yeah, it's far from being perfect. I think the initial news hyped it a little too much at UFirst Capital, and I have been playing around with it, and it gives pretty good answers. But yeah, it falters when it comes to details, and but it's still in beta, so I can't complain.
Yes. Yeah, right. if we all remember what, Alta Vista and Lyco search engines were like in the
There
early
you go.
days, and where obviously Google is taking, like, yeah, this is going to be fascinating for sure.
So
Yeah.
David, Steve stole my next question, but I had a specific lens through which I wanted to ask that question. So Steve,
Actually, it's just because we think the same way.
true that. Okay, so Steve's question, as you may see in the chat as well, is that, what are you excited to invest in through the CISO Investment Club? But I wanted to sort of zoom in particularly on the fraud aspect of it and see, which startups you think are closer to solving the most challenging or the most threatening questions in the fraud space.
Okay, I can answer both. So in the fraud space, there are, I'm oversimplifying now, and let me caveat this by saying I don't consider myself an expert in fraud. So if you talk to another practitioner that is closer to this, they will likely give you a more accurate answer. So mine is from kind of the CISO level. At a super high level, I think about fraud as two general areas. One is around, can you verify the person is who they say they are? Are they a fraudster or are they a legitimate user? And then the second one is, are the actions that they're taking now accurate and legitimate, or are they fraudulent activities? So classic example, account takeover, legitimate account, but someone compromised that account is now using it to conduct fraudulent activities. So typically I break it down to those two. What's interesting, if you look at the kind of identity space, most of the credit union providers, I think all except one, from what I recall, have acquired an identity fraud player in this space. And I forget the last credit player that has not, but essentially that's an interesting play in terms of how do you define credit scores and begin to leverage that risk measurement to apply to the fraud space. So there's one more player that can get acquired if you want a quick exit. The second aspect of it then is around the transactional fraud. And so I think that one, unfortunately, it's a combination of looking at peers that, so from the financial services place, you're looking for peers that have similar types of attacks. And essentially the intent is to share data. And if you think about why, it is because the fraud marketplace, the threat actors, if you will, are relatively organized these days. And so it's essentially an organized crime syndicates in different geographic locations. And so they rinse and repeat because that's the easiest way to go. If you think about level of effort for the attacker, just do the easy stuff first. Why do the 0 days kind of thing? And so if they can find a repeated pattern that a particular company is vulnerable to, then they will attempt that for other different types of peer companies that are out there as well. So financial service is very easy to measure because if you're in digital banking or if you're in credit cards or whatever, you're going to have the same types of classic vulnerabilities at hand. Well, I won't necessarily give you a specific vendor that comes to mind, but I think just the ones that are able to have the right customer adoption. So it's essentially a self-made market in that sense, because then once you get kind of the key customers as your initial marquee lighthouse customers, then you have access to all of that data, and then in itself you become a much stronger player. And it's much harder than for newer ones to penetrate unless they have some arguable competitive advantage and unique algorithms, if you will, to solving that problem. But I mean, these days machine learning and a lot of those techniques are widely available. So I don't know that there has been any recent bleeding edge stuff. The companies we've seen typically spin out from fraud practitioners or anti-fraud practitioners at these companies, and they've solved it for their own company, like at Coinbase or others, and they start their own, and then they kind of rinse and repeat from there. And I can talk to you offline if there's any specific players that you're particularly interested in. I can share some insights as well. To answer Steve's question, so well, the way SVCI works, we're not as organized as a traditional VC in that we don't have kind of themes or investment hypotheses that we create and then try to look for particular players that fit that theme. I mean, we should, because that's a more strategic way to invest. But the challenge with this being driven by practitioners is that we have day jobs. And so we don't have the luxury of time that Sanjit and Ekta may have to talk to a lot of different companies and talk to startups and figure out what the space looks like. So as a result, we tend to be a little bit more reactive, but once we make an investment decision, we essentially will not invest in conflicting companies. So we do effectively lock ourselves out of that particular space. And there have been times where we'll defer a decision to look at additional opportunities before making one. So it's not a completely reactionary either. But what I'm trying to say is that there isn't like a theme of the year or a theme of the quarter per se. It's essentially looking at whatever opportunistic deals come up. Now, in practice, it's actually fairly effective as long as we can catch the startups at the right stage, just because our deal flow is we're in a relatively fortunate position to get a fair amount of deal flow. And so there is kind of the startup ecosystem where if you have, especially, first or second time founders, they kind of get to know other founders and they're connected to their trusted security practitioner network. And so we kind of have some cross section of that. And so we get a fair amount of interest. So to give you some examples, of types of things we've been looking into, they would center around like data security, kind of the Gartner calls the DSPMs of the world, related to around privacy, around API security. There may be some arguably more cutting edge stuff that's adjacent to supply chain security, not just SBOMs, but really trying to look at kind of open source security risks and how to improve the whole secure SDLC lifecycle. I'm saying things, very, very high level, right? Because I'm not trying to name like, well, this is a particular trend that we're seeing. Essentially, like most investments, essentially it's a numbers game. So if we can spread our investments out enough, 20 plus, let's say, then we don't know which one's going to hit. And from what I've been told by the professional investors, classically it's like you'll have an interesting curve of which companies do really well, and it's typically only a handful versus the vast majority won't do that great. Now our IRR is actually pretty high. I think we're in the upper quartile from what I've been told compared to other VCs, but we do have somewhat of a advantage, twofold advantage. Number one, we are essentially the market, right? Number two, the investment terms we get are typically more favorable than what investors generally would get as well. So, or most investors may get, just because of the kind of the opportunity for further partnership, advisory roles, et cetera. So I hope that helps.
Makes sense. Thank you, David, for
Thank you.
explaining that. So with that, let's thank David, first of all, for sharing his comments for the last almost an hour. Really appreciate that. And I think it was super useful for me and sure for the audience as well. So next we'll get into the startup presentation. I will start off with the Connecto. So I would request Daniel and Brandon to start sharing their screen, please.
Sanjit, you mean Concentric?
Yeah, Concentric, sorry. Yes, concentric.ai. So, and concentric.ai is a portfolio company of City Ventures, and other VCs as well have invested. They've raised over $20 million already. So I'll let Daniel take it away.
Awesome. Thank you. Appreciate everybody's time. And David, excellent presentation. Really appreciate your insights into the space and what's going on and the value added there. So can everybody see the screen?
Yes.
Yeah.
All right. Perfect. Never been a huge fan of death by PowerPoint. I know we've all been through these things a million times, right? So it's more about, explaining the value and having some visual aids along the way as we discuss, what Concentric's doing, what we're bringing to the table and some of the problems that exist in the space. And I always like to start with the problem. I always put myself in that situation of being sold to, right? And I always think to myself, why am I here, right? What are we doing? Why am I spending my time, right, in this moment? So it all starts with the data, right? Everything that we do, if you really think about it, every single organization, customer, partner, prospect that we have spends countless millions of dollars on security solutions, right? We were just talking about, right? Whether it be a platform approach or a startup or, somewhere in the middle, we all have a security stack. And that entire stack, maybe not every bit of it, but a large portion of it is to protect what? The data, right? That's our most critical asset that we have, whether it be employee data, customer data, partner data. If we lose that data, if that data goes missing, if we have a breach, that's impacting all sorts of things around our brand, around, cost, operations, etc. So the data is really the problem, right? It's our most critical asset, but it is the problem. And it's an ever growing problem that we're never going to slow down, right? We're never going to stop from being what it is, right? There's so much of it that is critical and important to the business, whether it be the financial stuff or the customer stuff, sensitive data that we all need to identify, whether it be PII, PHI, HIPAA data, right? Source code, right? Things are starting to get very difficult, especially with data transitioning. And when we look at, the problem in and of itself, it's not, Hollywood, right? There's not an individual coming in from another nation state, acting as a marketing person, throwing that USB stick into the side of the laptop and running back to their country, right? That might happen every time and again, but for the most part, it's users are just doing what users do, right? They try to make their life easier. They're trying to work from home. We have this evolution because of, the recent years of zero trust and people, actively working from their home offices, as we all are right now. And those things that are taking place, people don't realize what they're doing, right? How they're sharing data over unsecured lines or sharing with personal email addresses so that they can access it at home, doing all sorts of things, right? So it's a continuous problem that needs to be addressed, and it had been addressed at previous companies that I've actually worked at in the data access governance space, which is the previous space to data security posture management, in my opinion. And as we're seeing the problem evolve, right, and continue, and as we analyze what those solutions, the previous solutions had kind of brought to the table for us, it was a good understanding of the data, but operationally it wasn't efficient for us to utilize and capitalize on as organizations to get ahead of this problem, especially as we've gone through this data transition, right? Everything years ago used to be on-prem. We had it in one spot. We can kind of lock it down. It was a little easier. Now things are transitioning into the cloud. You have hybrid environments, you have structured data, you have unstructured data. And regardless of what we want to do with it, as far as a cleanup perspective goes, or kind of locking it down, it's ever changing, ever growing, ever evolving, right? And so we need to be ahead of this. And that's what Concentric is doing. Even though that securing it remains a problem. But as we looked at it, how we've gone about this in the past, right? To find the sensitive data, we've used things like really complex regex rules, right? A stack of them to find sensitive data. We've used Yara rules. We used strings, right? Custom dictionaries that we put together. But the problem still remains, and things I've dealt with in a real life example is, an organization that has weren't thinking 25 years ahead, right? They created their part numbers, manufacturing number. Their part numbers literally mimic a credit card string. So now how do you define the difference between that, right? We can use Lens algorithms, we can bounce this, that. We still have a ton of false positives that we have to sift through. And our security teams are obviously already bogged down enough with the amount of threats that we're getting on a regular basis. So how do we eliminate those false positives, at the same time be able to scale with the enterprise as data is always growing, and discover everything that we need to do in all of the places that we need to do it? And whether that be across your G Suite, your AWS, your Azure environment, on-prem file systems, right? Structured data, unstructured data, all of it is relevant. And it's just how we prioritize it based on our infrastructure and what we deem to be critical. But it all exists. So the Concentric Semantic Intelligence platform is, in my opinion, and I'm partially a little bit biased, obviously, but I really feel like it's a cornerstone of your security posture, right? We spend, like I said, we spend all this money on buying security solutions to protect the data, but yet we don't know enough about the data to strategically protect it, right? Who has access to it? Where is it? What is it, right? Is it shared outside the organization? Where are those links? Are there unresolved SIDs and disabled users that are still accessing the data or have access to the data, right? All these questions that we have need to be answered in order to strategically use the technology that we're purchasing or putting in our stack to help protect it, whether it be augmenting DLP or any number of other things. We need this information, right? And I think about any of the best, books around war, around strategy, around things. It all comes down to having a really great understanding of what you're getting into, whether it be a battlefield or another team you're playing or any of those number of things. One of the biggest things though about Concentric is that it's a SaaS-based solution, and it is the ease of use and ease of deployment and operationalizing this and getting quick wins and then continuing to grow and see value. And so how we've done things differently, right, is that we've taken an AI-driven machine learning neurological network approach to this problem. And rather than needing those rules and those regexes and those complex dictionaries, we're finding the data through our AI and our mathematical models to present that data for everybody in a very clean, simple interface. It takes 10 minutes to deploy, and it's all API driven. And when they told me first it was 10 minutes to deploy, I said, okay, let me see this. But as we've done POCs over and over again, it literally takes 10 minutes to deploy, and we're actively real-time collecting data. On top of that, being an agentless and SaaS-based solution, as well as without needing a database on the back end, it's minimizing the operational overhead of the organization to run this in their environment, which is obviously going to be a huge help. And then minimizing the false positives and that whole problem that exists is huge, right? We have so many attacks taking place. If you could really hone in and pinpoint with high efficacy problems that exist, identify them, raise them to the top, that is what's going to really help our security teams and organizations stand apart from the others that are having these continuous problems. So, we have plenty of customers across the board, from high tech to healthcare, manufacturing, energy sector, et cetera. But all of them are utilizing the solution in different ways. And I think as they continue to evolve through the use of our customer success team and through their own evolution of understanding the data that's being presented to them, they're able to create policies and rules and get deeper into the utilization of the technology. But the data security posture management piece and the discovery piece is always going to be huge and number one. From discovery, you typically get into the permission access and getting to a least privilege model. And then from there, we're moving into the categorization aspect of things. We're putting things into clusters and buckets so you can manage it from that level, because it's inefficient to manage at an individual file level and unrealistic to think that any organization can really dive down to that, granular view of each individual file and restructuring permissions and classifying it. So then that last piece is getting into the actual classification and the tagging, right? So we partner with MIP and Microsoft, and we tag those files if desired with that proper nomenclature so that you can enhance or augment your network DLP, your endpoint DLP solutions, pick up on those tags, and also just utilize it through your email solutions as well. So outside of that, I've been around for 4 or 5 years, quite a few patents pending. I came on to this company in August of this year. And we were at about 20 some odd employees, 25 employees or so. We've grown that up to about 50 now, building out the sales team, building out marketing and all the other pieces. But we're backed by some phenomenal organizations and partnered with phenomenal ones as well, like You First. But we continue to win awards, and those are pretty cool to win, but it's all about solving the problems of the customer. So as we continuously grow that customer base, I think that's the validation for us, as opposed to some of the awards that come out. While they're appreciated, it's about solving the problems and going from there. So we'll open up to questions.
Wonderful. Thank you, Daniel. David, any comments or questions for Daniel?
No, thank you for the overview. Daniel, is really interesting to see kind of the breadth of data silos or services that you have, because I think one of the classic challenges we've seen with DSPM companies is kind of the ability to provide insight into kind of data lake and those types of services, as well as SaaS solutions. So that's not an easy particular problem to overcome. So thank you for sharing that.
Absolutely. It's something that definitely helps us, be a strategic partner with an organization and not just a point tool, right? More of a platform approach and being able to scale with an organization as they have all these different types of environments, and it's ever growing. So.
Wonderful.
Any other questions?
Thank you. Good. All right. Thank you very much, Daniel. And next we have Joby. Thank you, Daniel. And also thank you, Brandon. Okay, we can see
Can
your
you hear me?
screen.
Can you see the screen? All right.
Yeah.
Cool. Hey, first of all, David, thank you. Great presentation and also great discussion. I think we need a lot more time, but I think it was some great insights there. And thank you, Sanjit, and rest of the crew for letting me present here. My role, I run the BD for Theta Lake. Prior to that, I started BD at Elastic, and after that, started BD at StreamSets, which we recently sold to Software AG, which got me here. At Theta Lake, we are basically solving basically a compliance and security problem focused just on the communication platform. It's basically what I was kind of talking about. We see that a lot in the market. Specifically, if you look at it, modern collaboration has gotten really complex over time. It used to be just about email and voice calls. Now it's like everything. You have text, docs, reactions, emojis. And now we are seeing whiteboards and all the other Notion. You mentioned Notion and some of the other stuff. So we kind of like see that this surface area keeps on growing. And the whole unified communication space itself is littered with all kinds of services coming in and going out. So going back to that insider threat discussion, going about what data is inside and what data is outside is still not very clear. And then the other aspect, what we're seeing is that whole multi-channel aspect of it. And you will start a conversation in one channel, continue in another channel, and then kind of take it across. So this is certainly showing up in the whole market as all kinds of problems around productivity, around data leakages, and certainly around compliance and regulation. Compliance and regulation is something which has been in news a lot, with around $2 billion fine handed out to the top 10 financial services firm at this point. And one of the key challenges we see is that the tools which are built for the space are very much, they become really legacy. They were built for the emails of the past. So the formats are email format in which they are stored. It's a PST formats. And there are like convoluted stuff which some of the legacy vendors are doing. Things like they will convert a meeting into an email by converting into 2 lines, subject line, and things like that. Makes this highly impossible to kind of do any meaningful insight-based analysis on it. Or also like short messages, things like chats and all becomes really hard to kind of track and manage from the point of view. So certainly increased surface area to monitor from an IT CISO perspective, it becomes a bigger and bigger challenge. And that's what we're seeing. So very focused on the regulated industry to begin with, and also like new use cases coming in with the hybrid cases around training, supervision, surveillance, where you started to look at some of the things and start handling some of those capabilities. So space is there. We see a lot of that. So what you have built up is a SaaS service. It's basically what we've taken is a open API-based approach across. So it's a fully SaaS service, cloud hosted, but we understand the space we are playing in is not, it's not going to change overnight. Like archives are around 7 years, 10 years, 20 years time frames. So it's not easy to take some of those and migrate them around, and compliance and regulatory market don't move fast enough. So what we built is a very open platform. So we can take in any kind of data formats, for example, email, IM, chat, voice, everything you can think of, screen shares. We have a lot of patents in the video tracking at this point, and have built integrations all across. But also we keep it very open. So for example, we work with most of the compliance vendors and Miro and others on APIs for whiteboards and how we go and approach and track it and make it ready for archiving on the other side. So from a workflow perspective, what we do is we capture this across from all these modalities, and then we run our own internal AI/ML-based analytics on top of it and run all kind of regulatory policy sets on top of it. So you can do, hey, it's a MIFTI, it's basically a GDPR requirements, things like that. We have a whole set of policies that we go through it and come up with a risk score. That risk score can be customized for the industry you are in and things like that. It's a very flexible platform from the point of view. But the goal is to kind of provide a front end for the compliance officer or maybe for the HR manager, for the IT security managers, to create a very flexible workflow where they can route, okay, this seems to be an HR issue, route it to basically HR. This seems to be an education opportunity, route to a manager. Or this needs to be going and going to be a regulatory type of an issue which needs to be reported back. things like that, or security type of things. But after that, we basically take it and put it everything into an archive. And again, in the archive, we run our own 17A WARM compliant archive on top of any cloud. So whichever cloud the customer wants, we'll run it Azure S3 or AWS. But we can also support any kind of legacy archives. We know that we cannot replace a lot of those archives overnight. The goal is to kind of give them a path to transition them to bring it. I'll pause here if there are any questions. Happy to take here. All right. So from a use case perspective, where the market is today is a lot of activities around chat and compliance monitoring. So that we see in US, a lot of voice capture type of use cases in regulated market in Europe. And that's one of the things we go and support. But as you can see, the platform can support a lot of use cases around supervision and workflows and things. But the market today is in these three use cases is where we see a lot of focus around moving and migrating the archive from on-prem to the cloud and being able to go to this modern type of an archive. So just to give quick examples of two use cases, this is one of the largest US bank, in US bank. They were moving from Skype. They were basically looking at, they wanted to understand how many of their wealth managers, when they get on a call, are showing disclaimer. They wanted to also enforce small things like, hey, this is the approved content which should be shown to your customer. Not if you're changing on that, how many of them are changing or drifting away? Being able to do those analysis and being able to use that as an education opportunity, being able to use that as an approved way of doing business was super critical and helped us in rolling out that solution along with existing DLP and rest of the solutions we already have in the market. And we continue growing and moving Now we are in the process of working with Microsoft on migrating their on-prem archive system to the cloud. This is the another customer who's basically, this happened during the COVID. They had trading floors, and trading floors are everything recorded. But overnight, every trader's desk became a trading platform. So they had to overnight support video tracking and overall tracking of all the stuff which was happening on the machine. And we went and basically built out a Microsoft Teams recorder interface to it for them to go and support all kind of a video recording and all the call recordings which go in there. Being able to support business continuity, no loss productivity was a super critical factor. And over time, it has grown. It has grown from there. And this is generally we get into the enterprises. We go through one use case. Now we are doing a lot of optimizing chat compliance, a lot of capture mobile, SMS, WhatsApp capture, WeChat capture. Those are the other pieces which are coming in. And we continue extending and being able to extend the context on how we do analysis on it. So in summary, basically, we are today a trusted and deployed on multiple Fortune 500 companies, very focused on a regulated market, regulated financial services market, some traction in healthcare and education. Two of the top that's a mistake there. 2 of the top 5 Canadian bank and 3 of the top 10 US banks, which is there. And recognized by Gartner MQ as a cool vendor in 19. And now we are a honorable mention in the 2021 MQ, which has come out. A lot of awards and patents and things like that. From a funding point of view, we were initially seed funded from Wells Fargo Startup Accelerator Program. They continued on the Series A. Cisco Ventures came in there. And as part of the Series B, all the UC partners, so we have partnership with Zoom, RingCentral, Salesforce, and Cisco. All of them participated in the round. And certainly Lightspeed had been there before, and Battery came in as part of it. And Microsoft is we are a co-sell prioritized partner. So we have very good go-to-market from the point of view. So yeah, I would love to get your opinion on it and any questions I can answer on.
Thank you, Joby. David, any question?
Yeah, thank you, Joby. I mean, in some sense, I am fortunate where even at Marqeta, we didn't have to deal with those level of compliance requirements, but I can certainly see the clear market need for that. And, you know, it's a weak signal in a sense, but you know, looking at Battery and Lightspeed's participation speaks a lot volume to you must be getting significant market traction and scaling at this point. So I was, when I first saw the presentation, and I've heard of your company before, I was initially thinking, oh, if this could potentially help with kind of the insider use case that you were describing, it could, but the challenge would be, what is the friction that it potentially introduces, right? And so if there are ways where it's it's a combination of awareness. So people are aware, like, hey, don't do bad stuff. That's definitely part of it. But within both environments at past life and current life, we're essentially, Google Workspace, Hangouts, etc. So we can talk separately if there's integrations there. But that is at a high level a problem space that I'm trying to solve for. I just need to figure out what the right approach is, and it's not going to be classic DLP. So it's really going to be like what's the more innovative ways to approach it.
Absolutely, and it goes back to your answer on previously around that. Hey, this is a leaky bucket, so it's good. It's like as much as you can cover is what you can do, and that's why we're focusing a lot on the regulatory and compliance market, because there is there's a forcing function around it, but we can support a lot of the supervision type of use case. So happy to, would love to have a follow-on discussion. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. We'll make sure to connect. Wonderful. Thank you, Joby. Ram, do you want to share your screen?
Yep.
Okay, we can see. Go ahead, please.
Thank you, David. Thank you, Sanjeet and Ekta, for giving us the opportunity. David, my name is Ram Satya. I'm the co-founder and CTO of Connecto. We are a API-first design and test platform. There is no introduction needed for the API, but we'll quickly start with our introduction, and then we'll talk about what is our point of view, right? Amol and Ram, myself, are the two co-founders. Obviously, Amol is traveling right now, so he won't be able to join. But we have been in the whole digital transformation phase for the last 20 years, and we have worked with large enterprise, small enterprise, medium enterprise. We have seen the way how API has been evolving, right? We started building our first API back in AWS started building APIs, and we have seen the whole evolution of Netflix, and then the whole evolution of blockbuster type of companies that are dying down, right? And then the whole fintechs and API powered companies that are evolving, right? But we felt that the last 20 years, the way how APIs were being built has fundamentally not changed a lot. Still being the same, is very developer centric, right? And our point of view is that API should be looked at as how Figma powered the creators economy, right? We want Connecto to be the Figma for the API. Back in the days before Figma was even existed, it was wireframes and whiteboarding sessions and documentations around user experience and whatnot. But the whole platform like Figma was helping to power the creator economy, right? The creators thinking to be able to capture what they want to bring customer experience, right? Very similar to that, right? Connecto is the platform for business users, product managers, entrepreneurs, to create API design, right? And the way how we do that is we understand that the API has always been a developer centric and developer play. We abstract the technical complexity, giving the ability for business users to be able to create their design without having to have any knowledge around JSON or code structure and all of that, right? But yet, we are able to help business users to build their API with all the standards, governance, security, compliance, all of that is required, especially when it comes to API. One of the most common aspect is concerns around security, data, and whatnot, right? And that's our platform. So we have been, we've launched our platform in June 2020. We are a very early stage, company, but our platform offers two products. One is what we call as a design studio, which enables product managers and product managers and designers like API designers to come in and start creating their API. And we also have a test studio, which helps in end-to-end test lifecycle automation. So users connect their data source, they start creating their API. We abstract all the technical complexity, but we provide the full governance and the standards required for building their API. But our engine, our patented engine, which is NLP-based engine, generates the actual code, Java code, .NET code, for developers to consume those and go live with the actual API, right? We also partnered with Microsoft. We are using the PowerFX, which is now behind the GPT-3 code generation engine. We have some of those features part of our platform. But if you look at our value propositions, right, from an idea to go live, innovation has to be very fast. We have seen how digital disruptors have been, created a whole market share of 1.3 trillion, from a valuation standpoint, right? The Instacart, of course, no exception to that, right? But the power of API and API economy has always been developer, but I think our point of view is bring collaboration, bring business, bring product managers, bring creator economy within the whole API ecosystem that can change the world. And then for that we have created what we call as a connectors design dexterity, which abstracts all the technical complexity, provides very intuitive way of designing the API with all the right level of governance, and we also generate all of the artifacts that is downstream. We started this a couple of years ago. We were in stealth. We have done a lot of research. We have onboarded design partners, which I'll talk you through about this, going back to our initial conversation on design partnership. But today we support our RDBMS, NoSQL. We generate .NET Java code with very high compliance and airtight production ready. As we started doing this, we ourselves very, very surprised how we are able to generate production ready code, right? Without having to worry about cost of ownership, hosting the solution on third-party infrastructure and all of that, right? So our journey, we launched our platform in June 2022. In 6 months, we have about 100 users. We have some large enterprises that are our design partners, which includes Zurich, Swiss Re, Central Square Technology as well. And we also have a lot of channel partnerships that are actively using our platform. There are OEM channels, there are GSA channels. But we have, as soon as we launched, we have seen a lot of users onboarding in our platform. Very interesting. You will see that the next generation entrepreneurs are the techpreneurs, right? We have doctors, like we have ophthalmologists in our platform that are building APIs, right? Amazing empowerment. Back in the days, if you think about the whole creator economy, what Figma was trying to fuel, we are very proud to tell that a doctor, a physician, a neurologist, ophthalmologist building API using our platform. You can imagine how we are enabling, right? So there are several, integrations, integration partners like product companies, as well as OEM partners that are partnering with us. And so far we have been, building with the community. We have onboarded close to 8 different design partners, out of which 3 notable design partners are Zurich Insurance, Swiss Re, which is a reinsurance company, as well as Central Square. And we also have a whole bunch of users that are techpreneurs, that are using, that are part of our design platform, and they see the way how we are transforming their ecosystem of building API, abstracting the technical complexity, and simplifying the whole ecosystem, right? We are very
Ram, can we wrap up? Sorry to interrupt. Yeah. Okay. I'm sorry. That was
that's the last slide. Yeah, we are very early stage, but certainly looking for opportunity to partner with added Instacart as a potential design partner in our journey.
Thank you, Ram. David, any quick question for Ram?
Thanks, Ram. It's a great deck, and agree with the problem statement for sure in terms of how to improve API compliance. Even at Marqeta, we had open API specs, Swagger specs as defined as a standard, and developer adherence to that was still quite low. I think there are a number of solutions, as you probably are aware of, in this space that are trying to offer automated open API compliance, but that's okay. I think it kind of legitimizes the space. My initial reaction when I saw the top of funnel, so thank you so much for sharing the funnel in terms of like design partners and the customers you have. So good number, but what I'm noticing is I didn't recognize a lot of the names as coming from kind of, maybe I'm overly biased, Bay Area tech companies. And there's a lot of other tech companies and other geos that I think are really strong too. I'm not trying to say there's no exclusivity there, but it looks like there's an opportunity, to your point, to try and tap into perhaps the more local community, if you will, here, to see what kind of interest there is. I think I'm happy to follow up with you separately.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you so much, David. Yep. Valuable feedback.
Thank you. Thank you, David. All right. Next, we have Ajay from iChain. Ajay, please go ahead. We can see your screen. Ajay, we cannot hear you.
I'm the co-founder and CEO of iChain. And what we deliver to our valued customers is API-based encrypted, permission, and traceable artifacts. And to us, each of this is not just a word. We do lifecycle encryption, which means once encrypted or once chained, once the information is chained, it's encrypted through its entire lifecycle, making it non-fungible. And perhaps the only startup that promises to provide non-fungible business artifacts straight off the bat at the lowest cost, right? This is not tokenization. This is non-fungibility of enterprise artifacts that are permissioned and traceable through the life cycle. And why something like this is required is because, as you pointed out, David, in your initial introductory overview as well, is that there is significant amount of impact when the content gets breached. And one of the biggest challenges is that you're unable to protect specifically the insiders. Forget about the outsiders, but at least the insiders, people who have authenticated credentials, if you will. And here we have a strategy now to be able to split information artifact store, or this can be connected to an application, could be a semi-structured or an unstructured data store, if you will. Once chained, you have, what you get is a URL, a decoy URL, and this could be the same store. So if it's the report called confidential report for David.pdf, that confidential report for David.pdf URL will appear on your Google Drive or on your CRM, but the actual content will be stored somewhere else. Now, what happens is, even if an insider's or even if the authentication credentials are breached, the information is not breached because your information is only a decoy URL. Your actual information sits somewhere else. Now, smarter hackers can look at the DNS and figure out where the end information store is located, which also is prevented because even a super admin will not have access to the actual content, given that the actual content is only pointed to a particular application, if you will. So our claim, essentially, broad line, baseline, is we prevent even an insider to be able to hack hack a piece of information artifact, right? And of course, since it is non-fungible, just by definition, it is tamper-proof. And let me just show it to you super easy, right? I have a terminal here. And I run a command which essentially calls my API and picks up a file called classified file. And this file now, after the chaining process, produces a URL. Now, this URL is, as an authorized user, I can access this URL, but the actual file is residing somewhere else in the secure storage. Now, is that David? So what we have done essentially is split the function of creating a decoy URL and the actual content, if you will. The same thing, if I were to use a dummy CRM, I can essentially point this particular URL to the same file, if you will. So as an authorized user, I can now send this URL over across. Send this URL. I sent the command. I can send the URL over. I can copy this link, and for the first time, I can send the URL over Slack, and still the information is secure. That is, it's encrypted. It is permission. The default permissioning is internal use, and it is traceable through its life cycle. And the reason I call it traceable is because every action gets recorded on an immutable ledger, if you will, right? So that's broadly what we do: prevent insider and outsider breaches, ensure that it is hack-proof and tamper-proof through the life cycle, and every action again gets recorded on an immutable ledger, so it's cryptographically verifiable. That concludes our presentation.
Thank you, AJ.
Thank you.
I know we're running short on time, so we'll withhold my comments, but appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you, Ajay.
Thank you.
Jose will just share 2 slides, 30 seconds, Jose.
Hello,
Go ahead.
everybody. Thank you very much. My name is Dr. Jose Bolaños, and I am the founder, CEO, and architect of a new secure identity and authentication system that we have a patent, 2 trademarks, and it is a KYC AML biometric verification of a user, which is consistent with banking. We are members of x9.org in Washington, D.C., and we've just the crypto world, I'm sorry, the banking world is going to be changing payment systems from the SWIFT network to ISO 222, which is an XML file standard with encryption. And we're the directors of the West Coast here, in which the banking industry wants to take over payments, $4 trillion in payments in healthcare. So what's happening is we have a system that is essentially protecting the enterprise. You log in with a face recognition master PIN, and face recognition goes back to our server. When you registered, you uploaded images. The AI compares it, verifies that it's you. It's not just your face, it's you. And we've done simultaneous OpenID connections to WordPress, Salesforce, Microsoft 365, Google, and AWS. And we're launching in January of this year with an initial WordPress launch, 450 million WordPress websites. And we're in the process of protecting the front end is what it amounts to. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jose.
So super quick, it just be interesting to test some of the adversarial use cases to that, because we've seen attackers or fraudsters use take a 2D picture, convert it to a 3D model, try to mimic liveliness and different IP. Anyway, we can talk separately if you're interested. But
I would be happy to, because what we do is when you download our app and you register, you upload a pro picture, a non-smiling, smiling selfie picture, the front and back of a driver's license. And then we have AI that manages all of the images. Is it the same person? Yes. Is the name of the driver's license the same name you registered with? Yes. The ID on the phone, the geographic location, and then you enter a 6-digit master PIN. And we also have a connection with IntelliCheck that makes sure that the driver's license is real, which is the problem that ID.me got into. They were not verifying, and they got all kinds of hacks. And so again, 80% of the intrusions on enterprise systems is through the front door. Our launch is a B2B launch, and anybody who wants to get a hold of me, I put my information on there, jose@nimbus-t.com.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Cool.
everybody.
Thank
Very
you.
exciting to be talking to a cybersecurity team. The other thing we're doing is cybersecurity1.net is a website that we've deployed our Nimbus Key app on it with already a SAML 2 connection. So you can download our app, and we've created a community of cybersecurity experts to communicate and to use our system
Thank
in
you.
a very easy way before they deploy. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Jose. Appreciate it. David, any closing comments? I know we are past the time. Sorry about that.
No, yeah, some fascinating, really appreciate the feedback and engagement today. Really interesting, kind of innovative solutions that people are working on. So appreciate the opportunity for you listening to me, and it was great meeting everybody.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you. And I would also like to give shout out to our great friend Pradeep Aswani. He's a cybersecurity guru and an investor in this space as well. Feel free to reach out directly to him. Thank you very much, David, for taking so much time out of your busy schedule. Really appreciate it, and we'll follow up. Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for pitching.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.